I must hate me. Why do I keep trying the hardest thing to do on video? Hi friends, I designed my first ever mini bags about 2 months ago on this YouTube channel, and I learned a lot from doing the process. The first designs that I did were hand painted with a Food Lion design that I made. And because I'm still learning, and the idea is that I'm also a beginner trying to learn this along with you, I thought it'd be good to revisit that same motif for this design rather than changing it up too much. For the most part for this new version, what I want to do is just figure out a way to do the bag a bit more functional, pushing forward on my technical skill. I've got a whole bunch of different design ideas that I want to put into it, but I can do those later. I think it's just best to learn some more of the basics and just to get the base bag a bit better first. I want to do a full zip all the way around the bag. The first design that I did was inspired by a channel called Corte Leather. I used their video as a template for how to do the zip, but this time I'm going to try and figure it out myself, so we'll see how I get along with that. And also, rather than painting the bag this time, what I've done is taken the same design and I've got it embroidered. There's a company that I found on Instagram while I was scrolling, and they do embroidery patches for you, so I just got them to embroider the design without the iron-on patch bit, so I can work my magic with the bag and actually fit it onto the cover like it was before, but this time it's going to be embroidered. What I am keeping from the design though is the contrast stitching, because I thought that was a really nice detail, and I'm also going to keep the acrylic chain. The idea for the acrylic chain was inspired by a lot of jewelry brands and accessory brands that I follow. One of the brands is called Vitali. They do these really cool acrylic chains and bracelets, and they also do like traditional gold and silver jewelry, and they were actually nice enough to gift me these pieces that I'm wearing today. I think the favorite thing that they sent me is this chain. It is so sick, and there's also like an acrylic version, and they got these sick rings here. And also what they've done is they're providing me a 20% discount code to give to you guys, so it's linked in the description. If you want to copy the pieces, make sure you use the code, let them know that I sent you. And with that, we're going to go on to try and make in this new version of the bag. To start me off, I drew around the embroidery piece that I had made on a piece of leather using a white Posca pen. You can use a craft knife or fabric scissors. I just use fabric scissors because it's easy for me to get in the details. Next, what I'm going to do is use the same white Posca pen and measure out where I want to place the fixings. Before I started this, I measured out the exact distance that I would need. I'm using a ruler with a cork backing, just because what that means is it won't slip around on top of the leather when I want to mark out my measurements. I'm just using the cutting knife to cut out the regions where I'm going to be placing in the magnetic clips. The clips are going to be facing on the outside where the smooth part of the leather is. As you can see, it's got these little hooks here which I'm just going to push in using my thumbs, and then there's a backing which you basically fold these pieces down onto to secure them in place. There's only for any glue or anything. This is what the embroidery piece looks like, and this is what the back of the leather piece looks like. As I said, I got it embroidered without the sticky patch that you would normally get done. So what I'm going to use is the fabric glue to attach it to this side of the leather, which has the texture. So I have a smooth side on the back where the lid is, and then on the other side we'll have the embroidered image of the Food Lion, and it will come together like this. I'm going to also have to do a bit of stitching just to keep it together. The glue is very strong and it holds it together, but I usually want to make sure that I've got a bit of stitching in there just as a bit of extra protection. So this is the leather glue that I'm using. I don't have any particular brand recommendations. This is the only one that I've used, but the reason that I like it is because it comes with this applicator, which just makes it a bit easy for me to put the glue onto the backing. Always use a generous amount of glue because obviously this is what's going to hold it together, and if you want it to be a long-lasting product, you need to make sure that it holds together nicely. And I'll just brush it down. The reason I want to brush it is because I want it to be evenly spread, just so that once again it can hold together. The best way to make sure that the glue sets properly is to add pressure, so I'm using this rolling tool. It has a bit of weight to it, which is good, so I don't have to press super hard. But I just want to make sure that I get every single area and make sure that the glue is thoroughly pressed in. And then cut off any rough edges that I have left over. Obviously I drew this with a pen and I did a tracing, so it's not exactly super accurate, but we can fix any of those things later on with the cutting knife. and this is what the edge should look like, so that it's pretty much flush, but it's a bit textured. So I'm going to be using this leather edge paint just to blend in the colors, because obviously the color of the embroidery and the leather is slightly different. I'm going to be using an edging tool just to get the paint onto the edge of the embroidery. I really like this paint. The only thing is I've noticed that because of the shape of the bottle, eventually it's going to be hard for me to actually get the paint out of it, so I'm going to have to decant it, work with it maybe in a separate bottle, which is a bit annoying, but it's not too much of an issue, especially not yet since it's pretty much still a full bottle. This edging tool spins on the end so I can get an even coating across all of the edge when I'm moving it across. When using a tool like this, make sure that you clean it after every use, because otherwise the paint will get stuck in the mechanism and it won't be able to spin, which basically makes it useless. I pretty much freestyled this design, so I didn't make too much of a template. However, I decided that I wanted to have a wallet feature just so you can add some cards and make it a bit more functional. So I did have to measure out some of these to make sure that they fit properly and that your cards can go in correctly. And I'm just going to use this as a template, so rather than drawing out the measurements with my ruler, I can just get a simple template and have all of the pieces measured out accurately, and then just use my ruler and my knife to cut them out rather than doing it all freehand. These are the wallet pieces all cut out. The leather that I've used is quite thick, but it's also very flexible, which means that it has some stretch to it. So when I'm putting the wallet together, you'll be able to fit your cards in equally. The idea is that they would all lay on top of each other, and I would stitch across the sides and the bottom, and then you can insert your cards in between the flaps. Also, for the sake of speed, I actually cut out a piece of paper to the exact measurement that I want the inside texture to be. Leather always has a textured side and a smooth side, so you want to make sure that you're layering up so there's no horrible texture showing. This is a thicker leather with a much smoother surface, and then this is a more textured leather, which is a bit more traditional when you would think of genuine leather. But it also has the textured side in the back, and like I said, you would stick the two textured sides together with the glue, making sure that only the aesthetic side is showing. This is still flexible, but it's a lot thicker. Once I've sorted out all of my measurements, all I need to do is cut out this piece. I've cut this out to be roughly 30 centimeters by 11 centimeters. And because I want smooth edges, I'm just going to use the same magnetic clip that I was using before as a guide and cut out the corners just so that they're not as sharp. And this is what the base body of the bag is going to look like. This is a leather edging tool. It's basically a sharpened blade in between two prongs, and you use it just to smooth out the sides of the leather. This is because it can become worn out over time, so you want it to be as smooth as possible on the edges, and it makes it much easier to burnish. Burnishing basically just means smoothing the sides of the leather, so I'm using some water and some canvas. I've been researching other burnishing techniques, and I've seen people use wax and certain tools, so I'm thinking of trying that maybe next time, but for right now I'm just going to do this because this is the method that I know. And as you're going along, there should be a texture change in the sides. Slowly it becomes smoother, and you just keep going until you have the desired effect. Now I'm just going to measure out exactly where I want the lid to go. It's going to be roughly 20 centimeters down from the top of the bag. To make sure that the glue will set, I want to make sure that there's texture on the sides that have been stuck down. So I'm going to use this knife to add texture to both sides that I want to be sticking down. And of course repeat the process by adding glue to both sides, spreading it out with my brush, and then sticking it down with some pressure. Once again, to add a bit more pressure, I can use my rolling tool, making sure that I'm getting all of the edges and the middle so everything is stuck down nice and evenly. I want the bag to hang from the chain, so I need to add some hooks. I'm just using pieces of the thicker leather and then applying them in the same fashion as before. I'm going to stick them together in a loop and then burnish the edges just so they have the same texture as the rest of the bag. And I'm going to use the knife once again to score the back and make sure that the glue has something to set into. I'm sticking this down onto an embroidery, so rather than risk damaging the design by using the knife on it, I'm just going to stick this down with a lot of pressure and move quickly to the next step, which is adding stitches, rather than waiting for the glue to dry it. So I'm going to be using these leather prongs. I've got a 4 and a 2, and I also have a 1 here. When I use the 4, it's literally just going to be to make a little scoring point, just so I know where I can go in with the rest. I'm just using a rubber mallet to make any sort of indentation. The prongs are a lot sharper than they look, so you want to make sure that you have a base underneath whatever you're punching to make sure that it doesn't cut through to the other side. I've just got some scrap leather pieces here, which as you can see I've abused quite a bit. And I'm starting with the 1, and I'm going to use the rubber mallet just to knock that in. Like I said, it's easier for me to take out the 1 than it is to take out the 4. It might just be because I'm using cheaper tools. Like I said, because I'm a beginner, I haven't invested heavily in this, even though it is quite expensive to start off with using the tools that I have done. So it might just mean that I need to do an upgrade. For the actual stitches themselves, I'm using a wax thread. This is blue one. It looks so sick. The idea is that it actually melts when you burn it, so it's easier for it to hold into the leather. I'm using a saddle stitch to put these in, and to do this you use 2 needles. As a tip, try and use 0.5 cord if you can, just because this is the perfect size for actually using leather. I've bought larger thread before and it's just completely not worked at all. I've even broken needles doing that. So you push the thread through the needle, and then you get the tip and put it through the thread that you've just put through. It's because we're going to make a knot at the other end rather than tying it. We're just going to pull it, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side, so that we have 2 needles thread through the same piece of wax cord. Now that I have my needles, I'm going to go in through the front with one end, and I'm going to go through the front with the other end of the needle, so that both of them have a loop on the front. And I'm going to go through the back side with one of the needles through the hole that the furthest thread is coming out of, if any of that made sense. And then once that's done and I've gone all the way to the end, I'm just going to tie a knot, cut it off, and use my flame to melt the wax, and then push it down with my finger. That way it's completely set and it shouldn't pop at all. And this is the stitch that I'm going to be using for the whole bag. I have these silver clasps which I'm going to be using to hold the acrylic chain in. They're sliding quite nicely and I've already measured them to the right size. Now that the glue on the back of the bag has dried, I can actually use the stitching on the embroidered piece. What I want to do is not go all the way around because it's not necessary to have that much stitching, but I just want to make sure that all of the vulnerable spots that could come out through wear and tear are secured and nicely fastened. It is glued in, so it shouldn't move. However, it's just nice to have the little bit of extra protection. And also it looks quite nice because I've used this nice blue color. So now I want to make sure that the bag can fold together fully. So rather than measuring it out, I'm just gonna actually push in the hooks that we've already done to make a bit of an indentation, and then I'm gonna mark out where the magnetic piece is gonna go based on where I want the bag to close. I probably should have measured this out, but I found that this way works just as well. And they fasten in exactly the same as the other side does, and it should clip together perfectly just like that. Now I want to construct the inside. I've already started on the leather piece, and the rest of the pieces are going to go on top just like this, and I'm going to stitch across the sides and the bottom and add glue. This bottom stitch is what's going to hold in the card as you're using it, and I'm going to use these edges just to hold down these extra pieces. And the front is a complete rectangle just to give the illusion of it being one solid piece. For this, I'm not going to use a lot of glue at all because it's going to be held in mainly by the stitching, but it needs just enough glue and pressure to make sure that it can hold in while I'm doing the stitching itself. Like I said, it's the exact same style of stitch, and I punched the holes in a very similar way using the scrap piece of leather from before. Stitching is probably the hardest part for me. It's nowhere near as good as it needs to be at this point, but considering this is my second bag, I'm being very nice to myself and I'm not gonna stress about it too much. Because everything's layered up, you're gonna have to stretch the leather a bit more to make sure that it's flush on each side, which is why I used the softer leather for this, because it's easier for me to do the stretching. And then all I need to do is stitch this up so it looks like it's one solid piece of wallet. If you've ever wondered how that's made, at least now you know. So now we're coming to the last piece of the construction. I want to fix the two sides together so that the inside looks just as good as the outside without showing any of these stitching. But first we're going to add a zip. I cut out 50 centimeters of zip and I'm going to pull it apart so that I can add the actual zipper onto it. All I need to do is put both pieces on the inside, and then laying it down flat, I'm going to hold the two edges and pull it down, leaving just a little bit left, and I'm going to add glue around the edges. This was actually a bit of an issue for me, and I messed up so many times on this until I finally figured out that you need to be exact with the measurements on each side. Because it's a zip, it needs to be equal on every side that it's being zipped on, so the middle part needs to look exactly the same and measure exactly the same as each side. Once again, same process, I'm just going to add some glue. I've added a bit of a gap, as you can see, because I found this is the best way to construct the zip with this flat format. I'm just going to hold this down and make sure that the glue is a lot of pressure and set down. And then next we're going to add glue to all of the edges, taking the open side of the zip and folding it onto itself, which is why it's important to put a little bit of extra glue onto the actual zip itself, and then use pressure to hold it down. This can be quite finicky, but it's actually quite a simple method once you get the hang of it, which took me a good couple of days, I'm not going to lie. I also found that you need to move quite quick, but if you do one side at a time rather than leaving the glue to dry, then it should all work out pretty much. You have to move with a bit of speed with the glue just because it will dry quite quickly. But if you add enough pressure and if you just go one side at a time, you should be fine. I also found that it took a lot of pressure from my fingers to make sure the zip on the corners stayed in, because there's quite a lot of fabric bunched up and it's important that that part especially is very strong. And this is where we are with the outside of the bag completely done. So now we can move on to finishing the stitching and putting on the inside of the bag. I'm using minimal stitches again, just because I understand that that's one of my weaknesses. The zip has been glued down, so it shouldn't move. However, the best thing to do is to make sure the stitching goes over the zip so that it can never push through all the way to the other side, and then you end up with no zip on your bag. Once both sides are done, it all zips up nice and cleanly. And that is pretty much how the outside of the bag is going to look. So for the inside, I want to just cover up any of my stitching and extra zip that we don't need. So I'm just using a little extra flap of leather here, which I have in my scraps. I'm going to put that over the stitching and the zip to make sure that you don't see that in the final bag. And then I just want to add my leather pieces, which I have for the wallet and the backing, using the same method of gluing and stitching. I've also cut the edges slightly so that they fit into the rounded edge of the bag, which once again, because I didn't use a template for this, I kind of freestyled it. I didn't realize that I would have to do that, but we live and we learn. And I'm going to make sure that I stitch in the bottom and the top of each of the inside parts, just so that once again the glue is doing its work, but I don't want it to be doing everything. Also, what it will do is it will help to hold in the zip, especially at the bottom where it can be quite vulnerable because there's going to be a lot of bending at that spot. And also at the top where the zip will pull a lot. So I've made sure that I've gone all the way around, and I've done just a smaller one at the top because it's been held in by the glue, so it should be fine. The last thing I want to do is make sure that it doesn't open out all the way, because if you put something in the bag and it opens up to the degree that it is now, everything's going to fall out. So I'm going to add edges, just slight ones, so you can still open up the bag quite a lot, because that was the point of adding the full zip. But I'm just going to stitch in these sides, and I'm going to add these sections onto each part of the bag so that it's held together by the strip of leather at the bottom. This is very difficult to do. I actually had to use my little thimble there because it was really hurting my fingers. But that being the last hurdle, this is pretty much the bag in its entirety. So finally, this is how the final bag looks. I'm actually super impressed with how I managed to do this. It's still not absolutely perfect, but then again, what is? I think this is a lot more functional than the last one because you can fit a lot more stuff in it. Actually so gassed at how this turned out. I think the embroidery gives it like a nice touch as well. I really do love how I hand painted it before, but I think this just looks a bit more elevated, which is so dope. Thank you so much to Vitaly for providing the drip for this video. Remember, 20% off down in the description. Look forward to a new video coming soon. Make sure you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye friends. So gassed at how this turned out. Like, yo.